Do we have any questions, by the way? We're going to hit each topic of this, and I would encourage you to not ask questions. If anybody has a question, please ask it. We've got Rick right here with the mic. If you're thinking it, 10 other people are too. So people will learn. So if you got any questions, just raise your hands and we'll hit you up. Oh, I think Uncle Lou's got a question. Right. Let's see if I can get this right.
You got it right. Good job.
Big fan, Dan. What is the question that nobody asked you that you want asked?
You always got the craziest questions, Lou. I don't know. I just go with the flow. So don't have an answer to that.
We'll give you time. Maybe something can hit you later.
All right.
Put it right on your chin.
Hey, Dan. In Southern Michigan, we got a lot of access. So a lot of sections, it's hard to get bigger than like a mile section, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just hard to get away from people and find spots that are really where the deer can go, where there's not pressure. Do you have any kind of advice just generally on that? And then I know there's always options to travel further to go to places, but it seems like, yeah, like Southern Michigan, that seems to be a tendency where there's just so much access. Would you just be looking for like overlooked spots, or like what kind of would be your process for that?
So I'll tell you what, I speak a lot about overlooked spots and stuff. And I hear a lot of guys from Michigan tell me, you ain't doing that here. There's people everywhere. The area I'm in Wisconsin has a lot of pressure. There's more mobile guys though, because we can't leave a tree stand up, not for the season, not for the day or whatever. You have to pull it down every day. So guys will go try crazier spots. When I get here, I really do see a lot more overlooked stuff than back home. And back home, I'm usually killing the stuff on the overlooked stuff. So what I look at is how people are accessing. And around here, what I'm finding is most of the big bucks tend to not be in the deep spots. It seems like guys get deep. They got to take a boat. If they got to wade through the crap, they seem to get to all those spots, especially if it shines on a map and you can see it real well. But what they miss is the stuff right next to the road. If you got an access to a parking lot that drives into the property a little way, then you have the parking lot. Usually near the access, where people are driving right by. They're not getting in that parking lot and walking back to the road and hunting. So when I look at mature bucks, I think about scent a lot. I don't think there's anything you could possibly do to eliminate scent. And when you go through the woods, you're dropping scent everywhere. And I believe that scent will stay in the woods on the ground for probably close to 30 days. And a deer is going to smell that for 30 days. Now, that doesn't mean it's the same equivalent of scent as it was day one. It dissipates, right? But if you're hunting out there every 15 days or so, that scent never leaves. And those spots will always have human odor. And any place people are traveling, they're leaving that scent. And those mature bucks, what they want is where they live in daylight, where they move around during the day, which is a very small area around their bedding area. They want to be in an area where they're not smelling that human scent. So I'm looking for that spot that has no human scent, which is in a lot of cases right alongside the road. It's always fun to brag about the ones you went 3 miles back for, but a lot of my very biggest bucks, I've shot 100 yards from the road. I'm watching people access from a parking lot next to me. I could see my truck because people just don't, they don't go into a parking lot, park, and walk halfway to the next parking lot and hunt. Now, you still need the terrain you need to hold a buck, to have the bedding, but I'm looking for that terrain, unique spots. I'm looking at that property as if I was hiding from these people and they were trying to kill me, where would I hide? And that's generally where I find the big bucks.
Love it. Anybody else? All right, we'll move on then. So next I want to talk about how a mature buck uses his senses, his eyes, his ears, his nose especially, versus those immature deer. So hit on that for us a little bit.
Yeah, I think they all use their senses really well. It's just that immature bucks make a lot more mistakes. So for me, the big thing is the nose. I mean, I'll have deer will see me, and you watch them and they see you, circle around a downwind, they got to smell you. I mean, the danger is that scent. So the real big thing is keeping your scent away from them. So when I'm setting up, I mean, my big rule is to like be out of sight, sound, and smell. I mean, but they do use their eyes quite a bit too. They will bed on a hillside watching the parking access pretty consistently. Anybody that's looked for it, you will find beds watching accesses all the time.
Yep.
It's like uncanny. Even more so on private land. When I've had people ask me to scout their properties and stuff, generally a private property, everybody goes in from the exact same axis. There's generally something right up by the road watching them, and nobody even hunts that stuff behind the barn or whatever.
Yep.
And it's pretty consistent. But they'll get a vision. They want to look downwind. They want to smell behind. And what they'll do is they'll put themselves up against thick cover or a backdrop, like a log or something. But they'll have an open view downhill or over a field or something, and they'll watch one way, smell the other. It's pretty consistent.
Heck yeah. I generally find them doing the same thing. It's kind of refreshing to hear that, especially with a private land.
Mm-hmm.
They've got you, and people never believe that
Right.
until they see it. Any questions on that? That was kind of an easier topic, but anybody? No? Okay. So next, let's talk about mature bucks versus immature bucks when it comes to being susceptible to calling, grunting, rattling, sense, stuff like that. What are your experiences with that?
Well, to me, I think, and I get a lot of flack for this from a lot of people, but I think that you really got to catch mature bucks, off guard. And I think telling them where you're at is a problem. I think sense, if you took like doe and heat scent, if it really worked, did you ever see a doe and heat? Every buck in the herd is chasing around.
Yep.
If you had really doe and heat scent that worked, if you could put it upwind of a swamp, every buck that's in that swamp would come to it. And that's not happening when you hunt. So you're only fooling the ones that are so worked up that they fall for it.
Yeah.
Because something's happening with the scent degrading, or something's happening with it being mixed with something, but it's not working like an actual doe and heat. So I throw that right out the window. As far as calling goes, I'm never setting up and calling to bucks. To me, it's a desperation move. I would do it if the bucks are on the other side of the fence. I can't get at them. The only thing I can do is call them over. But when I'm setting up every time, trying to get in that window of daylight movement, getting right up against a bedding area. The last thing I want to do is notify them that I'm there. If they have any inkling that it's suspicious, then I have a problem. If he's in that bedding area and he comes out, I'm killing him. I'm on the exit trail. I'm as close as I can be. A lot of cases, I'm 75 yards from him. I can hear him get up. If I make a call or a sound, that deer's going to know I'm there. And when I have called to him, because what I'll do is I'll bring a grunt call with me, because they do work. And if one does go by and it's not close enough, I'll grunt and they'll come in. And probably 1 out of 4 comes in, but 1 out of 4 is pretty good odds. But what I have noticed is with mature bucks is a lot of the time they circle downwind, they look for you. If you grunt while they're looking at you, their hearing is so adept that they pin you right in the tree. And I think it's pretty rare they hear other bucks up in trees. So they don't like that. So calling to me is a desperation move. I'm not above that. I grunt to them all the time. I've killed several bucks by grunting, but it's always when something goes wrong and they're not coming to me. Yeah. I keep the grunt call, but the last thing I would do is sit in a tree and use it like a fiddle or something.
Blind call. Okay. That makes sense too, because, learning all this from guys like yourself, it seems like once you get in close to that bed, you don't necessarily need it unless you encounter the situation that you talked about where he's skirting you or something.
And, I think about that deer being the most paranoid animal out there. I mean, a deer gets to be 6 or 7 years old on public land. He is not running around in daylight. He is not running into calling. He's not running into scents, or he'd already be dead.
Yep.
Period. I mean, you just take a walk during rut, try to scout. And I've done that. You go on these travel trips or something, you go in November, and you try taking a walk even midday in November through the woods to scout, And every 15 minutes, somebody's whistling at you and going, what the hell? Because you're walking past them. So how does a deer survive walking around in that? It's the 2 and 3 year olds that are out running around. The big bucks, maybe one day they make a mistake and they go running around. And that's why people occasionally get them. But they really do not move, even in rut, all over the place.
Yeah, I agree. Any questions on that one? Come on now, guys. We got the Godfather here. Let's talk about how they adapt to pressure, because I think we could really hit on the gentleman's question, kind of getting in between the pressure and all that.
It's interesting. A lot of people talk about like pressure beds and areas they go under pressure, and they do move under pressure. But what I find is a lot of these spots that are pressure spots, I can think right off the top of my head of a couple of islands that are so hard to get to. Nobody really hunts them, and they're good spots, and they're kind of good all year. But after there's been pressure, like after pheasant season opens, ducks season opens, it's like that's the only place that's not getting pressure. You go in there, there's a million deer. I mean, it's way more than there was in other times. So pressure affected it. But what I see is the mature bucks seem to be there all the time. You're just putting more deer there. There probably is more mature bucks in those spots at that time, but I'm not seeing a huge difference. I've hunted under that scenario many, many times, and there's sometimes where it's done real well because of the terrain. But for the most part, I kill a lot more bucks just by naturally thinking of where they're bedded and why, because all the young bucks move because of pressure. They move a lot. I always say that I have a better time and easier time hunting a mature buck over, say, a 2 or 3 year old. We get 3 year olds that go Boone and Crockett in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's a bad rack buck, but they act a little different when they get to be 4 or 5. It's almost like it's a different animal.
Mm-hmm.
They're already in those pockets. They know where pressure is going to be. They're already in those places hiding from it.
It makes sense. Anybody? All right. So one thing that we hear people talk about a little bit when you start shooting these big deer is their will to survive. Make the best shot. You get into the tracking mode, calling it a dog, whatever, and you start to learn quite a bit real quick that it just seems to be a little different. Did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's kind of a touchy subject.
Yeah. Sorry.
Those of you that follow me know I've had some bad history lately with some bad hits. But you take the best you can out of it. And following this deer around wounded, you do learn a hell of a lot. And being who I am, you got to imagine anybody that knows me, I'm the person they call. A lot of people are too paranoid to call a dog or something because they're afraid somebody will know where they were at or whatever. And so I track a lot of deer for people. And you see a consistent thing when they got some life to them, where they turn around and they watch their back trail a lot. They'll take you through a field, circle around, get in a tree line, and watch where you're going to walk past. And then you go find the bed where they were watching you and you feel like an idiot. That happens quite a bit. But they're smart animals. And one thing they do too is they take you to their bedrooms. If they're not mortally wounded, or they're wounded in a way that it's going to take them a while to die, like a liver hit or a gut hit, a lot of times they take you to a place and you're like, holy cow, this would be a good spot to hunt.
Yes.
And that said, a lot of times some of the best spots I've found while spring scouting, you find a bunch of deadheads there and stuff. 2 things. If there's deadheads that have been laying there for years, nobody's getting in there looking around. And the other thing is, why are they dying there? Because they're going there to bed when they're wounded, or they're sick. So
right. I like it. Anybody want to ask any questions on that? Oh, we got one. All right.
This is more to the fact of what you said with shots and that kind of stuff. I had heard on Wired to Hunt, the one that released this week, with regards to eyesight. As someone who has a reconstructed eye and can sympathize with some of that kind of stuff, what are you doing differently as eyesight changes and that kind of stuff to help you be more efficient and be more, I guess, confident in your shot when you're releasing an arrow?
That's a very good question because that's something that bothers me a lot. And anything that's a problem with me, I'm consistently working on fixing. If you're not, you're a fool. Every problem you have, every mistake you make, I'm constantly trying to figure out, well, how do I make sure that it never happens again? And with my eyesight, it was really a struggle. And I talked to several people. One of the things I went through is what's happening with me is my eyesight's changing with age. And if I look at the pin, I can't see the deer. If I look at the deer, I can't see the pin. So talking with some other people my age that are incredible archers, they were telling me that what I was doing was I was pulling back the bow, watching the deer, and then looking at the pin and aiming at the deer, and the deer would do things. And I don't, like in Iowa, I had 150 coming at 10 yards, and I pull back the bow and I'm aiming at it, and I'm just waiting for it to, it's kind of quartering to me to turn away from me, and it gets broadside at like 8 or 10 yards, and I'm staring at the pin at its chest, and it quarters away, and I shoot right behind the shoulder, and we never found that deer, and we couldn't figure out why. And I went back and watched the footage, and the deer had turned towards me, and that's not what I saw. Because the deer's blurry, I thought it turned away. And it was just mind-blowing to me. And what ultimately ended up fixing it, I believe, because I haven't hunted like this yet, but I went to Steve Pagel, who I think is one of the most incredible archers in the country, but nobody really talks about him because he's quiet about everything. And I told him my problem, and he ended up, went through this whole thing of testing my eyes and stuff with lenses and stuff, and he put a lens in my peep. And when I looked through that lens, and what's funny is Josh there brought this up years ago, and I kind of blew him off. But now an expert confirmed Josh was right, and I have to say, Josh, you were right. But with that lens, I can see the pin, I can see the target, and I am shooting incredibly better. So I'm really confident going into this season.
That's awesome. What did you get, a clarifier or a verifier?
I think it's the clarifier. It was actually the most powerful lens they got.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they got like 9 each way.
Okay.
I'm at 9 on the clarifier side.
Wow. We got any other questions? Right. I'm going to ask a selfish question that's off topic. I went to Indiana a couple years ago, and I watched your videos learning how to scout flat, monotonous country.
Mm-hmm.
I chose some water access, and you made a comment in your video that I watched, said, normally when you get into the beavers, you get into the bucks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain your reasoning behind that?
Well, the beavers are usually in that thick alder brush, and there's usually good bedding in there. There's usually there's water. The deer are down that low water that's got thick cover, and where the beavers are, there's usually thick cover, and the beavers keep it that way. They keep clipping off the trees. There's usually a lot of poplar around where beavers are, and deer love poplar. They just go hand in hand.
Okay. Awesome.
Did you find that to be correct?
I actually did. So we did a podcast with a gentleman telling us different, this will drop in our series in a couple weeks. His name's Alan Summerford, and he was talking about native browse and like the different phosphorus, calcium, and protein levels in what we would just look at as weeds, specifically like ragweed, primrose, stuff like that. And he talked about how stump sprouts were a huge part of a deer's diet.
Yeah.
And as I was walking through scouting the other day, along the water's edge, the beavers were tearing the poplar trees up, and every single stump had little sprouts with lush lettuce-like leaves. And it took me back to the podcast and then to your video, and I was like, so I just had to ask that.
Poplar trees, a lot of people don't get this, but when they're immature and they're just sprouting out, especially the ones where you cut the tree and they grow, because you just get this boom of brush.
Yes.
Instead of just a shoot.
Yeah.
When you get that, like in cuts, when they like cut poplar trees, man, that stuff is better than clover, It's better than corn.
Yeah.
And you got all these people that all they talk about is the crops.
Yeah.
And their idea of what deer eat in the woods is acorns. You know, deer eat more browse, especially mature bucks, than crops
Yeah.
by far. And poplar is probably the biggest one. It's like I talked to a biologist once. I think he had the perfect term. He called it deer candy.
So
Yeah.
would you say that the majority of that poplar diet stems from uh, the stump sprout theory, basically, where they can reach it?
I would just say that it does make more access.
Yeah.
It makes more of the buds that they want to eat lower. Because if you just have shoots and stuff, I mean, you don't have much of it.
Yeah.
But where they do a cut, you get a ton of it, and it's almost like a food plot.
Yeah.
You know, when it's immature.
That
I mean,
makes
once
sense.
poplar's mature, they can't reach it.
Yeah. Because that's the perfect climber tree.
And
You
then,
go
you know,
right
when
up
you
it.
don't have a cut, that's where the beavers come in. They cut that stuff, and you get that sprout back and that growth back.
Love it, man. Anybody have any questions on that? I know that was kind of off topic, but I had to shoot my shot. All right. So tell us maybe a story or two about some unique situations you encountered where,
You had a question out there.
oh, my bad.
You talked about how much browse the mature bucks eat. Have you found that when you log an area or areas that are logged, that mature bucks tend to move in those areas and take up residence while that browse, especially just starts growing?
Yeah, I think the big thing is when it just gets enough where you have cover, you know, which usually doesn't take very long at all. But the bucks tend to go to the downwind sides of logged areas, especially if you have any kind of terrain features like a jog in the cut, you know, which usually has to do with the shape of the terrain, how they cut it. But the downwind sides is usually where they're at. The trouble is that so many people are into hunting logged areas that you can have too much pressure too. And that's going to be a case in a lot of places. Finding a remote one that's off the road or off the beaten path or doesn't have travel to it. Like sometimes they'll go out and do a remote cut and then they block the access after
Yeah.
they're done. Those ones are much better, you know, where people aren't finding them. But when you do get one that doesn't have too much pressure, remember they like to bed on the downwind side of the cut. They don't like being in the middle of that thick stuff unless there's openings or an island of timber that got left. But they like being on the downwind sides and having that thick to their back, look at the open woods. And when you walk around, you'll know it if you do it in spring because you see the rub lines down around the bedding, you know, on the back sides. But
Can you hear me? Good. Yeah, in regards to the browse, would you consider that to be the same for prescribed burn timber areas once they start to regenerate?
absolutely. Yeah, burns are just as good as cuts.
All good? All right. Tell us maybe a unique situation, encounter you ran into when hunting a mature deer where you saw him doing something crazy that you don't really see much.
Ah, geez. They're all crazy.
Maybe you found one
I
hiding
don't
in
know.
a crazy
I guess
spot.
one of my biggest bow kills was a buck that when we field dressed it, it bottomed out a 300-pound scale.
God.
It was one of the first hunts I did in the area where I live now. I was driving past the place, actually looking for deer glassing in I don't know, like July or August. And I seen this buck right next to a parking lot where it was marshy and stuff right on a land border. And I started watching for him and I started seeing that there was two of them in there. One was like a 140 class and this one was in mid 160s. And just a crazy rack, tined, bent back and stuff. It was just weird. It had beams that were over, one was like 30 and a half, one was 31, and they're heavy. But that buck would come out of this bedding area and stage at this willow tree and then cross the road right next to the parking lot. And this is like the main parking lot everybody goes in from. And I started watching this thing and parking there and just make believe I was reading a newspaper and stuff when people go by, and it was funny because I had this like decoy car. I had a station wagon with a "I brake for raccoon" sticker on it and stuff, and but that buck would come out, and this 10-pointer would come out, and they had this marsh had a couple clumps of trees, and a 10-pointer would come out of one, and the other one would come out of the other, and where they met, they had a scrape right underneath that willow tree, and they would both work that scrape in like competition. And when I went in there and hunted, that 10-pointer came in first, the 140. And at that time in my life, I mean, we're talking 25, 30 years ago. At that time in my life, that 140s 10-pointer was a pretty good buck.
Heck yeah.
And I was thinking I was crazy as I watched that thing walk off and leave. And it actually went through the parking lot right past my car. Well, there's a ton of hunters back there. I was watching hunters walk past me. The hunter access was 75 yards, and just about the time that buck got out, it's kind of flooded, and there's a little creek that goes through there and sometimes holds water. And I'm watching that buck walk off thinking I'm nuts. And out of the corner of my eye, I just see this ripple in the water, and I look, and the big guy standing right there walks right up. And he actually walks so close, he's probably like, I don't know, maybe 5 yards, and I'm almost at ground level in this willow tree. And I shot that thing. He took one jump, looked around, and just fell over like a thud. That was a cool, crazy hunt.
Heck yeah.
It's one that'll stick with you a while.
Yeah, you weren't kidding. Any questions regarding that at all?
Hi, I was wondering with your locating the bucks in the summertime, do you see a major shift of them going to their fall areas and getting back on them?
Some of them I do, some of them I don't. And studies, like radio color studies, show that about 1 out of 3 bucks has multiple home ranges, but 2 out of 3 have like 1 home range. For me, I mean, like a trail camera or a spotting one or a glassing one or whatever doesn't necessarily have to mean that that's where I'm going to kill them. I never put trail cameras right. I want to kill a deer. I just want to know a deer is there. So I want it in a spot where I'm going to find out that there's a deer there. My scouting, my map reading, my footwork will kill the deer. I don't need a camera to do that. And I just want to know that there's a deer there. Some of them do disappear, maybe 1 out of 3, but it's not like I put all my eggs in one basket. I find several deer to hunt. One disappears, I'm on to another one, and that's how you got to do it. I think too many people that get started in hunting the way I'm hunting, they start out and they go, this guy's crazy. This ain't going to work or whatever. And then they walk out and he goes, according to what he's saying, there should be a bunch of beds right here. And they walk out there and they go, holy crap, there is. Look at these rubs right in the beds. Holy crap, this is going to work. And then they set up on that and they put all their eggs into that basket. And what they don't realize is I'm finding 100 of those and I'm hunting all season and getting 2 or 3 chances at big bucks. You can't put all your eggs into one deer, or, they disappear, they move, and they move around a lot. And there's a good chance he's not there the day you're there. I'm always trying to learn. And like a few years back, Exodus gave us a bunch of trail cameras to do this, and we put a whole bunch of trail cameras inside of bedding areas, and I just forgave those spots because I knew I was going to kill them for hunting, but I put these trail cameras right in the bedding areas and just decided I wasn't going to hunt those spots that year, and got pictures for a season and watched how these deer bed. And then I had some friends do the same, and we analyzed all the pictures. And what we found is most of the big buck bedding areas, even when you saw them with a lot of wear, there was a 2-week peak period. And these varied through the whole season of when those bucks were there. If you were outside that 2 weeks, you probably weren't killing that deer. But even during that 2 weeks, that deer might be there 5, 6 times. But 5 or 6 times is pretty good odds out of 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
But it's still less than 50-50, right?
Yep.
So you're not killing this buck every time you go into these bedding areas. You do get some bucks that just lock into one bedding area and stay there. Hey, great. I take advantage of that and I kill them. But for the most part, these bedding areas have like a 2-week window. And figuring that window out is the key to success. And when you go into these spots, being a detective is key. So let's just take one buck, for example. I'll give a little story here. The one I shot 2 years ago. That buck I was hunting for several years. He was 7.5 when I shot him. He lived in a cattail marsh. That buck bedded in cattails, moved in cattails. It was just so hard to kill him. The cattails are too high to hunt off the ground. There's no trees to hunt out of. There's one spot where I could get an opportunity on a little island of trees. If I hunted on the point, there's some trails that came through there out of his bedding. But he had me figured out there. I gave it too many shots and failed too many times. And I couldn't get at this deer, and it was bothering me. And I kept going back, and it kept bothering me in my head. How can I get this deer? Can I create an opening in the cattails? Can I do this? And in springtime, when it really clicked, I was walking through there trying to figure this thing out, trying to find some niche. And going through there, I ran into something, and I'd seen it before, but it never clicked. This little high spot in the cattails, where the ground came up high enough that there's no cattails. There's a little grassy spot, and on the edge of it, you couldn't even see it on an aerial. It just blended in with the cattails. But on the edge of it was some willow brush, just a small strip of it. I mean, this island of high ground was probably only 75 yards long, 15 yards wide, and it just had this strip of willow brush on one side of it. And when I got into that willow brush, there had to be 50 worn beds in that willow brush. And all the willow brush was rubbed up aggressively, and you could tell it was a big buck, high up and tore up and branches broken off that were, big around. And I'm like, okay, that willow brush loses its leaves in early to mid-October. Deer have hard antlers to rub in early September. Like, it's a pretty short window of when those bucks would be there. Because I know he ain't laying there when those leaves drop in the burying sun right out in the open. They're there when it's thick. So that's a pretty short window. So I knew that buck would be there early season and quite a bit based on those beds. So I follow the trail out of there, and it's one trail basically leaving that bedding, and it's a heavy, matted down trail. And it comes up onto the grassy point 75 yards away. And there isn't much that's on the public there, but there's a little brush pile with one tree about this big around in it where I could get a stand about as high as I could reach and just shoot over the brush. And then I figured out a way to get in there. But I knew that deer would be there early season. So that first year that I hunted it, I waited till I had a brisk north wind, and it had to be brisk because I had to get around this deer to stay on public land. I had to kind of go through them. So I had to go around them and through deep water. The cattails had like knee-deep water. So I had to sneak through these cattails and stuff in this brisk wind when the deer's not going to hear me because of the wind, and the wind's in my favor. Sneak to that tree. And the first time I hunted them, I got in there, and it was really windy during the day. So I got in there when it was really windy mid or day, because if you wait till the evening, it calms. And I get in there, and I wasn't there half an hour, and a doe fawn gets up like only 15 yards from me, bedded. And it never knew. I climbed this tree, set up a stand, set up the sticks and everything. It even amazed me. But 25 yards in front of me, the doe pops up. And she starts slowly feeding straight towards me. And there's a trail that goes right underneath me into a little tiny opening underneath this tiny tree. And at the same time, I start hearing something coming through, sloshing from that buck bedding area towards me. And this doe gets underneath me, and she's right at point blank, and she looks over and sees the climbing stick, stares at it, looks at the next one, looks at me, and goes, tears around to the front, right back where she was between me and the buck, and just starts blowing and blowing and blowing. And you just start hearing that sloshing going the other way. Didn't run, and I'm just assuming that's my target animal. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming it is. So to keep it honest, just in case that didn't bother it too much, the next day I hunted it again. Nothing. And then I did what most of you guys wouldn't. I stayed the hell out of there for the whole rest of the year. Just left it alone. And then when the next year came, the very first brisk north wind, I went back to that tree. Did the same thing. The only thing that was different is the does didn't get up. They weren't there that day. But the buck was. And he came in, and he popped out. I remember him sloshing coming, and I'm thinking, this is probably that giant buck I've been hunting. And he popped out, and it is. I mean, it's kind of amazing when it actually works,
Agreed.
And he came by at 10 yards. I shot him. I got him. I mean, it was a little messy. I for whatever reason, I hit him a little back. Probably because I tried shooting him walking. When I pulled my bow, he heard the bow click. So he stopped and he was behind a bush, and I had to wait like, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 minutes. Maybe it wasn't that long, but it seemed like that before he started walking. And then I didn't want to grunt stop him because I figured I grunt, he's tearing out of here. He already heard a sound and he's not, you know. So when he started walking, I just figured at, 10 yards, you can't miss. And I just followed him a shot. And I ended up hitting guts, liver. And then I just backed up, got a dog, and
Yeah.
the dog ran right to it. So
Is this the one you had a couple guys help you recover?
Yeah.
Too? Maybe
that was
Joe
a very,
and
yeah.
Rick?
Yeah.
Was Rick there?
Rick was there, Joe
Okay.
Rentmeester,
Okay.
Tim, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that hunt.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually took us, I don't know, it was like 7 hours to get that buck out.
God.
It was crazy. That buck was so heavy. We never did weigh it, but 4 grown men couldn't hold that on their shoulders with poles. We
Man,
couldn't hold it up.
that's crazy.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Anybody got any questions right now before we hit our last subject? Yep.
Yeah, Dan, so that spot you mentioned that you had seen the buck from the parking lot was pretty, I went to the workshop and I noticed like the spot itself was pretty nondescript. Like there wasn't a big point that came out. It was just a big kind of bedding area.
Yep.
And I find a lot of sign spots like that where I find sign 300-400 yards away from a bedding area that's 80 acres. And you've got this bedding area that's got maybe 20 little islands of brush, and maybe it's grass and it's got autumn olive, or it's buckthorn and it's got openings, I'm trying to get close, but it seems like, there's 20 spots I could hunt in there, right? I could go in any of these little buckthorn trees in between these little bedding areas. And I guess just kind of like narrowing down the exact spot within that. A lot of times I don't find sign in the bedding area. I might find it, like I said, 300-400
Yep.
yards away. And I've got a general direction, but I guess just like trying to figure out the spot within the spot, that's where I really struggle. And I was wondering like what kind of like advice, because a lot of guys are setting up back where that sign is, and I know that's what not to do. But like I said, you've got like, if you've got like little islands, little hills all over kind of in an area, like I'll find a lot of mixed like autumn olive stuff, for instance, and there's tons of beds kind of everywhere in that. So trying to find the spot where the big buck is within that, that's kind of my struggle. Can you talk about that some?
So you got to look at kind of like how they exit that. And you want to take the last beds as if they're his beds, whether they are or not. They might be satellite beds, but then go back to your out of sight sound, hearing of that spot and set up on the exit trails. And generally within that bedding area, that buck's going to move pretty free and easy. It's when he exits it that he slows down. So you're still set up on that buck. You're probably still going to get daylight movement. The trouble with a spot like you're describing is it's probably got multiple exits, but I'll have a setup on each one of them. And each one of those exits tends to be at a time frame. So maybe this exits because there's corn over here and they're eating corn right now. Maybe this exits when it's rut and there's does over there. Maybe this exits for acorns in early season. And you got to do the detective work and figure that out. Or you got to have the hunting experience where you've been there a few times and you start to figure out what works. I mean, there's a lot of times I get to these spots and I figure out after I've been there, I was wrong. I read it wrong. Well, the next year I'm prepared. You know what I mean? It isn't something that's going to happen instant. And some of them, it's so obvious, it's easy. Some of them, it's not. It's really hard.
Anybody else? All right. Kind of want to throw something out there for you guys. If you can't tell, he's not afraid to fail. Seems like you fail a lot, and then you learn. It stings now. You learn, and then you come back prepared and kill the dude.
Yeah, a lot of guys just they look at the kill videos and they say, "Holy crap, he killed 2 bucks last year." Every time he goes out, he kills one. No, I hunted 100 times. I killed 2 bucks.
And all the scouting as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of work in it.
A lot of work. So, what would you tell these guys as far as like being able to stay on mature bucks consistently year after year? Maybe not kill one every year, but at least be in the game.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like it takes to be in the game every year?
Well, it's a lot of scouting, and One thing I see that is a real big issue with people is they lock themselves into one property. And this is going to be especially in an area like this, because there isn't going to be a big buck on every property.
Right.
There isn't going to be one that's at, 4 years old or older on every property. So you got to be willing to abandon, go to new spots, try new properties. I actually, if I'm not on a big buck at the beginning of the season or I'm in a new area, I'm going from property to property to property. And as I'm hunting spots like on the map or scouting into spots, I'm looking at the sign. If I'm not seeing the sign I want, I'm on a whole nother property. And then all of a sudden I'll start seeing sign or I see a buck and then I start narrowing in. But you got to be open to drop and ship. You can't say, I always hunt Pigeon River. I
Right.
always hunt, this property. I always hunt that property. You got to be open to going where those bucks are because there isn't a big buck on every property. And another problem is you got to pick your battles. Some properties got a huge amount of terrain. They're really nasty and stuff, and they've got some big bucks. But killing them is really difficult because they could be just about anywhere. I really love a property that has like about 10 spots that big buck could be and has a big buck. Because I can hunt through those 10 spots pretty fast, and I'm probably going to get on them.
Yeah.
But you put 10 bucks in a property that's 3 miles across and it's got spots like that all over the place, I could spend the whole season and never see one of them. So it is about picking your battles.
Do you ever run into bucks that you just feel like you can't get in on and kind of abandon ship and move on to the next one?
I never have the feeling I can't kill one. The only one thing that would do that is if it's a 1 acre piece of public and you go in there and you can't get to the bed, or you're going to bump them off the property. But literally, if they're in a spot where I can't get at them, I kick them out of the bedding area. I'll go in and try and kill them. I'll try and get in there in the morning over the top of them. I'll try to stalk right up and shoot them in the bed. I just had that conversation with a customer a little while ago. I'll do whatever I have to do to take a chance at them, knowing it's 99% it's going to be a failure. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to move them. Now I can kill them.
Love that.
No free rides. You don't let them bed there for nothing. They'll just sit there all season and tease you.
That's awesome. Anybody got any questions before we close it out? This is your chance. Good? Oh, here we go.
Right there on your side.
Yeah, I'd like for you to touch about your balloon theory a little bit.
There's some right up there actually is bedded window back.
No, I'm not really locked into it. It's kind of a half a joke, but you got to wonder. It seems like I didn't come up with that either. Some guy in the forum came up with that, and it made a little bit of sense. But these balloons seem to settle down into the low areas where the thermals pull them. And it's kind of funny. We just started noticing that in these swampy areas, every place we'd find really good buck bedding would be just littered with balloons that settled there. So it got to be kind of a running joke. I said something about it and went like viral.
Yeah. First, me and Jake Bush were talking about that the first time I scouted with him. And I asked him what his thoughts were. And he was like, well, look at all the sign we found. And look what we found with a sign.
Mm-hmm.
Balloons everywhere.
It got kind of bizarre because you find these beds and it was like almost eerie. You'd be, okay, where's the balloon? There it is.
Yeah. Yeah. At first you kind of laugh and then you're like, there's something to
It's
this.
just happening a little too often.
Yeah. Like almost every time. It's
Yeah.
crazy. All right, guys. Well, we got any more before we close her out? All right. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming to our show. We are dropping the Whitetail Apprentice series next week. So please tune into the Mobile Hunter podcast. Dan, thank you so much. I appreciate you, brother.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.